Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Political State from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder here in the Oklahoman's video studio, downtown Oklahoma City. Joining me this week, my colleague Justin Wingeter from the Federal Government Beat, and our guest this week is former State Senator AJ Griffin. I'm not sure if, well, first off, welcome. Thanks for joining us this week. And I'm not sure if last week's elections had to be somewhat of a relief, right? You're not on the ballot, you're not having to worry about that. Were you able to just kind of sit back and relax and just kind of enjoy the show for a change?
I did. Tuesday night was a lot of fun. I did a couple of media appearances and just kind of watched as a bystander instead of participant for the very first time. Although I participated in a few of the races and had a vested interest in who replaced me to serve my district, and was very pleased at that outcome. The 20th district will be represented by Senator Chuck Hall, who a friend of mine who was a partner in service while I was in. He was the mayor of Perry, one of the communities in my district. So I'm thrilled that he will be representing my constituents at the Capitol. Yeah,
so still keeping a close eye on things. But so now you find yourself as the Director of Government Affairs for PACOM. You know, you left, you didn't reach term limits, but you'd been in that seat since 2012. We don't have to get into this too much, but I mean, what was, you know, I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons, and you're making, you know, personal decisions for you and your family as well. But you know, why did you decide not to remain in office?
Well, it was a difficult decision because I enjoyed my time in public service and experienced an awful lot of success getting things done, especially on the projects that I worked on the most: mental health, our child welfare system, juvenile justice issues. But of course, I think of public service as kind of a season. I really do believe that our system is best served by people who go and serve and then rejoin the populace. There's people use the phrase, you know, I'm just a regular person. Well, I'm just a regular person who happened to serve in the Oklahoma Senate for a short time. Never intended it to be a career, although I very much love policy work and continue to want to stay involved in the arena. But you know, only a few thousand Oklahomans have had the pleasure, as we celebrate our state's 111th birthday today, and only a few thousand Oklahomans have had the honor and the pleasure of serving as a legislator, and I took that very seriously. But I was really right time for me to rejoin the public sector, the private sector.
And one reason I want to ask you about that is because, you know, we saw several of your colleagues in the Senate and even the House that bowed out a little early. I mean, this was a year of change, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Some reached term limits, some incumbents lost, but some decided not to seek re-election. And once again, there's a lot of different factors at play there. But this had been quite a stormy last couple of years, and I'm not going to ask you necessarily if that influenced your decision, but what were the last couple of sessions like, with special sessions sprinkled in there, compared to when you first entered the Senate? I mean, how would, and do you feel like we're kind of beyond that now going into the next session? How would you kind of assess the last couple of years?
Well, for my former colleagues and my new colleagues in the Senate and members of the House, I certainly hope we're beyond it. I hope they have an opportunity to spend more time working on things that are important to them as legislators and important to their constituents, instead of just putting out the fires. And the last couple of years, we were really just kind of playing defense on the budget. It wasn't any one particular decision. I don't think you can go back to a single point in time or even a single cause that created the firestorm that, in particular, the last 18 months were. I think it was a series of decisions, and then of course the fact that as a state we have not yet addressed the long-term needs of stabilizing our budget and created a vision fund and created ways to anticipate the boom and the bust that we know is going to happen as an energy state and plan for it so it isn't a crisis every time it occurs. I hope that we've learned and that we'll do better, but you know what they say about the oil patch is, I promise, if you'll just give me another boom, I promise I won't squander this one. Well, but I hope they turn the corner. It was an extremely stressful time, and there isn't a single person that was at the Capitol in any capacity, including the press that was covering the Capitol and the lobbyist corps and our staff. We forget about the stress of the staff that were serving the legislature in their full-time job, the things that we went through over the last 18 months. So everyone kind of deserves to turn the page and to start anew. You know, in a normal year before term limits, someone leaving after 6, 8, 10 years was not a big deal. It's only been since term limits that we have this forced turnover, that the natural turnover among legislators has become a big deal. And so that's something as a state we need to just remember that this is a self-inflicted situation, because there was always going to be a small portion of the legislature that turned over. People that didn't, for one reason or another, didn't consider it something they wanted to do for decades. They just wanted to do it for a while to be in service to the state.
Yeah. When you talk about getting over that hump and being able to focus on important issues, you're not saying education spending and the budget were not important issues. You're saying that hopefully you can stop, legislators can stop running uphill and can actually stand still for a minute, look out, what are the things we would like to address, rather than, as you put it, putting out fires.
Well, and there was a lot of important work that's happened over the last couple of years. You know, I got a lot of things done. They were, you know, things that were not controversial, that didn't cause a lot of attention to be drawn to them. But of course, the focus was, how are you going to fill this hole in the budget constantly? That's what, I don't know how many hours of my life were spent in caucus meetings talking about that very thing, whenever we weren't talking about many of the other things, although there was still important work being done. The other thing that I hope this new crop of legislator has, as they look forward, is a little bit of restored trust from the electorate. That's probably the hardest thing as an elected official to deal with, is serving people that you know don't necessarily trust you, and in a day and age of social media, make it very aware that they don't trust you, and they don't trust you or the process or the people that you're working with. And I hope they can turn the page.
Well, so I mean, so many new faces in the legislature. I mean, you know, 6 years almost makes you a career politician now. It seems like, you know, but there is, you know, this new wave of new lawmakers coming in, almost half of the House and a good chunk of the Senate. You know, we didn't see a shift in the balance of power. You know, Republicans still have an overwhelming majority, a super majority even now in the House. But there did seem to be this kind of shift towards moderation a little bit. We saw a lot of that in the summer in the primaries, with maybe some of the incumbents got beat. And I want to ask you about that, because I think it's probably fair to characterize you as a moderate. I mean, you can object to that if you'd like, but I mean, first off, do you feel like that is an accurate description, that the legislature has seemed to kind of made a shift towards moderation? And then second, what does that mean, do you think, moving forward, especially into the 2019 session?
Well, if I noticed anything about the newly elected officials and those that are coming back, is that many of them are just good old-fashioned practical problem solvers that haven't necessarily campaigned on, you know, I'm going to go do this for you. They've campaigned on, I'm going to be there to solve problems, and what those would be real problems. Now, you and I both know that there's still going to be a lot of really interesting pieces of legislation filed over the next couple of months, because some people just can't help it. But the bulk of the legislatures are going to be made up of problem solvers, and we can categorize them as, you know, moderate Republicans, moderate. If they're a problem solver, truthfully, I don't care if they are an R or D. Get there, solve problems, listen to your constituents, and represent your district. The people that were forced out of office at the ballot box on both sides, they all had something in common, and that's many of them were representing their own interests at the Capitol, as opposed to the interest of their constituents. And if you look at the commonality among both sides and what they were working on, what they were saying in the public space, I think that was really the thing that everybody who got voted out had in common, that they weren't necessarily the voice of their district, but they were their own voice.
Yeah.
Are there people at the legislature, legislators who are very boisterous, who give, in the public space, as you put it, give these rousing speeches or point fingers, and then you meet them behind closed doors and they're just average people, and they're like, hey, let's hang out, let's get together, and you're wondering, didn't you just give this nasty speech or something?
Yes. That's the best answer to that question. Yes, there are people that have a very interesting persona, public persona, for one reason or another, usually for political reasons. Right. Or they're the person who's been selected by their particular subset, and we're like, we need you to be this. Oh. But if you meet them, they're just a normal person. You know, it is ironic that we elect people that kind of act a little bit like Oklahomans, and if you're not very happy with what we have at the Capitol, we should all probably do a little self-reflection as well. What do we see? Yeah. You know, it's not, because it is very much a reflection of Oklahoma. Whenever you get to know our membership, vast majority are hardworking folks that are solid and have a good sense of who they are and what they want to accomplish. And then we have some showmen. You notice I said showmen.
Accurate there.
Didn't say show women.
Yeah.
And that's something I am
yeah.
thrilled to see the number of women. We didn't jump by leaps and bounds, but we made an improvement there. And some of the women that are joining the legislature for the first time are going to be unbelievably talented lawmakers. I in particular got to meet Brenda Stanley, Senator Brenda Stanley now from Midwest City the other day, and I think she's just going to be a rock star.
Yeah. There is this kind, there's, as there always is, or usually is after an election. I mean, there's kind of this spirit of renewal, and so many new lawmakers, and after the last couple of years of this budget infighting, and you're right, it kind of came to a crest last year for everyone, media included. It kind of felt like the day after Thanksgiving at your house. It's been full of people, and you're just like, I'm ready for this, just to everyone to go away,
Please go away,
and to be over. Not that people need to feel sorry for us, but. So there is this kind of kumbaya atmosphere right now. The ceremonies this week, and people saying we want to work across the aisle and get things done. And part of that is helped by the fact that the economy is improving, and that, there's this talk of $1 billion extra. Now, not all of that is going to be available for the legislature. And when you look at everything that everyone is saying they want to spend that money on, it goes away pretty quick. So, I mean, how quickly do you think we'll get to kind of, what has been traditionally just, the common environment of the legislature? Or do you feel like it may be a different year this year? Because the politics can turn on really quick, and, the kind of the happy feelings of a swearing-in ceremony have a way of vanishing pretty quick at the Capitol.
Well, I know that the two leaders in the two chambers are going to have a challenge ahead of them. With that many new members, in particular, Speaker McCall is going to have to rely on his elected representatives that are helping serve in both of the caucuses and in leadership. I think two key positions that people don't talk about a lot are the minority leader positions, because who's serving as minority leader can set the tone for what happens in a chamber as much as who's serving in the majority. And I know with Senator Kay Floyd in the Senate, she's a talented and intellectual. I mean, I always say that Kay Floyd's the smartest person in the room, and I don't care what room she's in. And Kay will approach things in the Senate like a very much a Senate way. It'll be thoughtful and systematic and data driven and well rounded. In the House, to have for the first time the minority caucus being led by a woman and a young woman, with Representative Emily Virgin serving as the minority leader in the House. It will be fun to watch her grow into that position and as a first-time leader in that type of a role of that high profile, and to see how she and Speaker McCall set the tone for their relationship will be very important. I mean, I don't think anybody who was watching doesn't think that the relationship between Speaker McCall and Minority Leader Inman played a big role in much of the dysfunction of the special sessions in particular. Yeah.
Well, you talk about the impact that the minority can have, and in recent years, in a lot of ways, the Democrats have been the nation's most powerful minority, because a lot of the focus was on raising revenue. You have that 3/4 requirement, so Democrats had to play ball. In the House, at least, Republicans have that supermajority exactly with 76. Now, I'm not sure that revenue-raising measures is going to be much of a factor this year. There doesn't seem to be that appetite. So, what is the role, do you feel like, of the Democrats? I know, speaking as a Republican, but what is the role of the Democrats going into this year? What opportunities, if any, can they play if this is still a Republican-dominated legislature?
Well, and I'm glad to hear you say that the minority was part of had to be part of getting to the 3/4 threshold to raise revenue. And I do agree that I don't know that revenue raisers are going to be a big topic of conversation this year. I think other things will, some additional accountability. I know that Senator Roger Thompson, who's going to be the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, he and myself and several others actually filed a piece of legislation last session in hopes of going back to line item budgeting. So I think you're going to see the line item budget become very important, and that's where the minority can have a big impact, because they're going to be serving on those subcommittees. If in the Senate, at least, the subcommittee structure on the budget will be important. Yeah. We'll have to see the House comes along with that type of development, but individual members still have a significant voice if they'll use it. It does require bipartisanship for a Democrat, and it requires the majority party to also be willing to listen. If I were a Democrat in the House, I would file some legislation and go find me a Republican senator to carry it on the other side, and try to ensure that we do truly have bipartisanship. You know, the dysfunction over the last couple of years, people will say, well, it's because we're so partisan. But if you look at the votes, it really wasn't a partisan issue. And if it was, you'd have to break the parties up into 4 instead of just 2, because both sides were responsible for the difficulty in getting to a compromise on the needed revenue that we did need to increase in order to fill this budget gap. I'm not going to say stabilize, because we didn't do that. We filled part of a budget gap, and then thankfully the economy's improved and we're going to fill the rest of it. There's no such thing as extra money in the state of Oklahoma. That doesn't exist, because every single dime's already spoken for with one important core function of government need already. We'll see that investment go to the things that it should: education, mental health, healthcare, corrections.
Also next year we have a new Governor-elect Kevin Stitt, who has kind of come in with this feeling like this mandate of change and wanting to bring increased accountability. Now I want to ask you about, yesterday we saw the first bill in the Senate filed by Senator Treat to create this accountability office, kind of similar to like the CBO in a way. So it looks like we're going to see the legislature make a push to maybe add this office that takes a deeper look at budget and policy, transparency. The governor-elect wants more power over, appointing agency heads. There's a lot of talk about government reform, and on the surface, it sounds like maybe this wouldn't be that controversial per se. I mean, it's not your typical partisan issue. But what do we need to be watching for in the early weeks of the session as this government reform effort comes up? What are going to be some concerns for some Republicans, and do you feel like Democrats are going to go along with the majority on this effort?
I think it will look different in the House than it does in the Senate. I think in the Senate we'll probably see a little more consensus around some of these things than we will in the House. Of course, creating a new state agency when we've been working really hard to shrink the quote-unquote size of government over the last several years is an interesting approach. I think the need for this is a result of the budget cuts that have happened to the legislature itself, because you now no longer have the numbers we used to have in support to do many of the things this new agency is going to do. Now there's some value in having it independent so that neither chamber controls it, and these are people that don't necessarily work for either of the chambers, so that it truly is an independent evaluation of budgets and performance and things. So that will be part of that controversy, is why are we growing government when we've spent so much time trying to shrink it? Is this really the best way to spend this money? Are these things private groups can do and do for us, and we can pay someone else to do it instead of creating another state agency? And I think all of those will be questions that come out about that particular piece of legislation. And I do think that out of the Senate you're going to see a focus on the budgeting process and try to improve it and improve the transparency to protect from things that have plagued us, like the crisis that wasn't a crisis at the health department, and which could have been solved by a line item budget process. And coupled with, there will be fights, a lot of fights over the boards and commission concept of government versus a gubernatorial stronghold. We just saw that although Oklahomans say we want to give the governor more power, we want the governor's position to be more important, and then we go to the ballot box and the people defeated a measure that would have combined the governor's and the lieutenant governor's offices and had them work together. So sometimes the things that we say that we want and the behavior of the electorate are different.
Yeah. And just one quick follow-up on that. I mean, do you feel like, because you talk about this idea that on the surface this is expanding government and more power for the governor. I can envision Republican House members or Republican senators, some saying this is the opposite of what we want to do. But do you feel like, have we seen that when we talk about that shift towards moderation? Do you feel like maybe some of those members who may be the biggest critics of it, not to say that the middle will be just like, yeah, I'll sign it, just give it to me, but do you feel like maybe we're going to see less resistance this year than maybe in years past? Or
yeah, although some of the names have changed, I still contend that those elected to office reflect the state, and so the names will be changed. And although many of those people that would have objected to this as growing government are no longer with us, I have a feeling there'll be others that replace them, because the legislature does reflect the people. And there is a segment of our state that will interpret that as growing government.
Yeah. Well, as we enter the final minutes of this week's episode, Justin, I want to ask you about a story you have coming up on Sunday to change gears here a little bit, but as we're looking forward, we're also still looking back at the elections. And one of the things that we saw and we've talked about before is, this rural and urban shift, particularly in Oklahoma County. A lot of attention in Oklahoma County. I mean, the election of Kendra Horn, flipping that into a Democratic congressional seat. Drew Edmondson did well in Oklahoma County. It's not a shock that Democrats are doing well in Oklahoma City, but it's just they are solidifying Oklahoma County and Oklahoma City as their base. And you've got a story this Sunday that takes a closer look at that.
Yeah, it was really, we've written a lot and talked a lot about the Horn-Russell upset and the race that was and all the reasons for it. Steve Russell, Congressman Russell, blamed demographics essentially, or cited demographics as the reason for his loss. And he's at least partially right. I mean, the demographics of Oklahoma County are changing, and they're changing in the Democrats' favor. Looking at legislative races, you had 6 races that switch, or 6 seats that switched from Republican to Democrat this year. 4 of those are in Oklahoma County. You had 8 that went the other way, from Democrat to Republican. All 8 of those are outside of the county. As you mentioned, Edmondson won here, and Horn obviously won here in defeating Russell. So it is a shift. It's not an unexpected shift. I was talking it's a noteworthy shift nonetheless. It's not shocking. I mean, I was talking to Mayor Holt about this, and he was telling me, if you go up to somebody and you say, I represent an area, a metro area of 1.3 million people. It's an area where millennials are coming in at high rates, where people of color are coming in at high rates. That person's going to tell you that they're represented by a Democrat in Congress, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously that has not been the case for quite some time here. So this is really, in my opinion, sort of coming to what the rest of the country already is. That urban areas are represented by Democrats in Congress, certainly in state or city government as well. And we're seeing, I think we're seeing that in some of the legislative races here too.
Yeah.
It's a really remarkable victories. You had, I want to get the House district numbers right. Yeah. So House District 83, this Northwest Oklahoma City, the Village, a little bit of Nichols Hills as well. Chelsea Branham wins there. A Republican or a Democrat has never represented that seat. It goes back to 65. It's always been a Republican. I mean, every single time. And Republicans won every race there by at least 18 percentage points over the last 24 years. Yeah. Never less than 18 percentage points. And Chelsea Branham comes in and wins there. You have House District 95. This is more like Midwest City, the area directly around Tinker even.
Yeah.
Republicans had controlled that district since '92. Democrat Kelly Albright wins there this year. And so you have some really remarkable, obviously we talk about Senate District 30 and 40, and I talked to the mayor about that. He was not surprised by Kurt's victory there, but it's nonetheless a pretty significant shift. The mayor was telling me 3 years ago, his neighborhood in Northwest Oklahoma City was represented by a male Republican in the State House, State Senate, and Congress.
He was one of them.
Yes, yeah. Obviously he was the state senator there. Next year will be a Democratic woman in all 3 seats. That's just a 3-year shift there. And it's kind of anecdotal, obviously, but it's nonetheless, I mean, it's 3 different seats flipping from, and he's real big on the gender thing. I would just, for this conversation, mark the Democratic shift there.
Yeah. So you talk about, Democrats controlling, most levels of government now in Oklahoma City and Oklahoma County. Not at mayor, but AJ, I want to ask you, that's a former colleague of yours, Senator David Holt. Does Oklahoma City have a Democratic mayor now? I mean, we talk about this moderate, push, and seeing some moderates leave office this year. Yourself and Holt was a moderate as well. I'm just kind of curious on your thoughts as you're, watching your former colleague from the outside in, now mayor of the state's largest city.
I'm very proud of my friend, and I think Mayor Holt's doing a great job. And when he was running for mayor, I told him, I said, that looks like a really fun race to run. So to run a bipartisan campaign that you can full on the people that you trust and admire from both sides had to have been a great experience. So I was always jealous. I said that maybe one of these days I'll get to run in a nonpartisan campaign. But it's concerning to me, and it's probably kind of an indication of the real problem, that when we have a switch from Republican to Democrat, we talk about this in the manner of demographics and shifting demographics instead of, you know, what is it about the Republican message that isn't resonating with these populations that are growing in this area. So I think Mayor Holt in particular has done a good job of bridging that divide, and he recognizes within the city that the lack of diversity in city government is a problem. And if you look at our state, and our lack of diversity has become a problem, we will benefit on both sides of the aisle from an improvement of diversity of experience. When I say diversity, I just don't mean in color, but gender is important, background is important, income is important, ethnicity is important, because we need a state government that is reflective of all of Oklahoma. I was thrilled that we saw such a high turnout in this election, to have over 50% of the electorate participate, although we shouldn't be thrilled with over 50%. You know, we should be thrilled because it was 97.2 or something like that. Another area that Mayor Holt worked a lot was to improve our election process, which, by the way, as Oklahomans, we should brag about the process of our elections. It's after the election, and we get to talk about the results. And none of the results are in question. And as far as I have heard, we did not have any major issues at polling places. You know, we had the big problems like someone was 10 minutes late opening it up. If that's our problem, we're doing very well, because we could be in Florida and not have any idea who won.
Yeah, definitely.
California,
yeah,
a couple
several other
states.
states.
Arizona, they're still counting.
Well, when I think about this shift in demographic, or the shift in representation here in Oklahoma City, you know, it's kind of a DC effect, right? Because you've got, you know, the bubble of DC, a very liberal city itself, but right now, or at least for a little bit longer, you know, Republicans control, you know, every branch, and you know, Democrats are going to take control of the House here. But there was a lot of talk in 2016 about, you know, the media that's based in DC, you know, didn't have their finger on the pulse of the country as a whole. A lot of government workers live in DC. I think about the similarities to here now, because Oklahoma City is the base of power, and I think it's something you talk about in your story, Justin. But it's a Democratic city, and it's still a very Republican state. And what's the, you know, not that when Republican lawmakers come and stay in Oklahoma City for the session that somehow they change. That's not the case. But you know, as a senator, you were going back out to your areas that are different than Oklahoma City. What's the impact on that? Having, you know, the media center, the business center, you know, the lobbying center, everything like that, is right now in this Democratic bubble, while the rest of the state is very different.
It won't have as much impact because, you know, although for 4 months of the year the legislators are here in Oklahoma City, you're still kind of living in an isolated environment, just with the Capitol crowd, so to speak. You know, I had the best of both worlds. I represented this very diverse 4-county rural area with, you know, the largest town being Guthrie at about just over 10,000 people. But I also lived 25 miles from the Capitol, so I kind of had the suburban experience in my home life, so kind of had a little bit of everything. You know, rural Oklahoma is still very conservative in nature, although not as conservative, I don't believe, as in behavior as our electorate has been behaving recently. By that I mean the elected officials. You know, we were cutting budgets, and then the peril hit rural Oklahoma in particularly hard. If you look at the budget crisis, where it's had the biggest impact, it's actually in rural Oklahoma, where we picked up seats. So, you know, sometimes the way we behave at the ballot box and what we say we want aren't always the same thing. So I do believe I'm back to saying I think we elected different people this time, regardless of party. I do believe we elected more problem solvers and fewer ideologues, and that it should make the entire process just work much better.
Yeah, well, definitely be interesting to follow. A lot of new faces, and maybe several months down the road we can bring you back in and kind of talk about how well they're doing there.
That sounds like a
kind
plan.
of judge from the outside.
Yeah,
You're probably used to getting a lot of judgment.
I get to be the one playing armchair quarterback.
Yeah. Well, AJ Griffin, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you joining us this week. With Justin, I'm Ben. That does it for this week's episode of Political State. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for joining us.